It's not wired up now and doesn't look like much of an electric chair, but it is usable. And the warden here tells me it could be activated within days.
It may be hard to believe, but it wasn't that long ago that electrocution was still the legal method of execution right here in the state of Georgia. In fact, it wasn't until the year 2000, at the start of a brand new millennium, just a generation ago, that House Bill 1284 officially changed the state's method of execution to lethal injection. A relic of a not-so-distant past. The electric chair served as Georgia's primary method of execution from 1924 to 1998, claiming the lives of 441 prisoners. Today, the original chair is on public display at the Georgia State Prison, while its replacement sits tucked away in a closet near the death chamber at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Center, a quiet reminder of a not-so-quiet history. In 1996, Representative Doug Tepper even proposed replacing the electric chair with a guillotine, arguing it would better facilitate organ donation from the condemned. Now, this bill ultimately failed, but the debate reflected a strange crossroads of morality, medicine, and punishment. Georgia has practiced capital punishment since 1735, with methods ranging from public hangings in town squares to executions by firing squad, and at least 2 documented cases burning at the stake. Electrocution was once seen as a modern alternative, eventually supplementing hanging by the early 20th century. Now, although hangings continued sporadically until 1931, it wasn't until October 5th, 2001 that the Georgia Supreme Court actually ruled electrocution unconstitutional as cruel and unusual punishment. At one point, Georgia ranked 4th in the nation for number of executions performed. That ranking may have shifted over time, but the legacy of state-sanctioned death remains deeply rooted right here in our state. In this episode, I'll dive into the full story of electrocution in Georgia, from the first man electrocuted back in 1924 to the last in 1998, and how the practice moved from Milledgeville to Reedsville before ending at the Diagnostic and Classification Center right in Jackson. We'll explore not only the timeline, but how this method became dominant and eventually fell out of favor as public opinion and legal standards evolved over time. Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Back in the late 1800s, thanks to the minds of Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, and many other scientists and researchers, electricity was this new wild concept, a new force just starting to light up cities with arc lighting, those bright, buzzing street lamps running on thousands of volts. But as this new invention started to spread, strange and deadly accidents started to make headlines. Linemen and workers would get zapped instantly by this somewhat invisible current. One moment they'd be fine, the next gone without a mark. One famous accident happened in Buffalo in 1881. A drunken dock worker named George Smith snuck into a power plant, grabbed a live wire, and died right there on the spot. This death ultimately caught the attention of Alfred P. Southwick, a dentist from Buffalo, New York, who thought electricity might be a more humane way to carry out the death penalty than public hangings at the time. He wondered if this deadly power could be used for something else, like executions. At the time, hangings were still the main way to carry out capital punishment right here in the United States, and they were pretty horrific public events. Sometimes they went wrong, with people suffering slow, agonizing deaths, or crowds turning it into a grotesque spectacle. And after a series of botched hangings in the US, there was mounting criticism of that form of capital punishment and the death penalty altogether. Not only did this New York dentist think that maybe electricity could be a cleaner, more humane alternative, a quicker, less barbaric way to end a life, but so did many others. So they started experimenting, testing electricity on dogs to find the right voltage and electrode placements, eventually designing a chair. Yes, what you now know as the electric chair, based on a modified dental chair to hold the condemned still during the execution. This new device promised to be a less gruesome, grotesque than hanging, even though today we know how brutal and painful it could and would actually be. And just like that, the electric chair was born, a symbol of capital punishment wrapped in the promise of science and progress, but carrying with it the dark weight of death, pain, and controversy. So here's how it all came together. The electric chair, a device made just for executions, works by strapping the condemned person into a sturdy wooden chair and sending a deadly jolt of electricity through electrodes attached to their head and leg. Before the execution, the inmate's head and legs are shaved to help the electricity conduct better. They're then seated in the electric chair and tightly strapped in with leather belts around their arms and legs. Then a special cap, soaked with saltwater sponge, is placed on their head, and electrodes are attached to their legs as well. Sometimes the inmate is blindfolded or even has a bag over their head. The execution itself involves cycles of electric current passing through the body. The first high voltage shock, usually between 2,000 and 25,000 volts, is meant to knock the person out immediately and stop their heart. Then a second, lower voltage shock follows to cause fatal damage to the vital organs. And then after the shocks, a doctor checks if the inmate is still alive. If there's no sign of life, the time of death is recorded and the body is left to cool before being moved for an autopsy. But if the inmate is still showing signs of life, the warden can order another round of electricity, or in very rare cases, delay the execution altogether. Back when it was first introduced, folks thought the electric chair killed by frying the brain, which sounds terrifying. But later science showed that what actually stops a person's life is the heart giving out. If you've ever seen The Green Mile, you've probably got a very vivid sense of how terrifying and shocking, literally, the electric chair was in practice, complete with blinding flashes, smoke, and sometimes gruesome botches. Back in the late 1800s, a lot of people thought electrocution was actually a step up, something more modern and supposedly more compassionate than the old hangman's noose. In 1888, New York put together a special commission to really dig into this new idea. And after tons of tests and debates, the commission officially decided electrocution would be the new way to carry out executions right here in the United States. Now let's fast forward to 1890 and William Francis Kemler, who became the first person ever to be put to death by the electric chair. He was going to be the guinea pig for inmates facing electrocutions going forward. He'd been convicted of murdering his common-law wife, Tilly Ziegler, in a drunken rage just the year before. His execution was supposed to be quick and clean, but things didn't go exactly as planned. When William Kemler entered the death chamber, he was calm, even wished everyone good luck. He sat in the chair, but the warden had him stand up so they could cut a hole in his suit to attach a second electrode. Once he was strapped in, the condemned told the executioner to take it easy and do it properly. The switch was flipped, sending 1,000 volts through him for 17 seconds. But to everyone's shock, he was still breathing afterward. They had to crank it up to 2,000 volts for a second shock. And that's when things got, well, gruesome. Witnesses described his blood vessels bursting, a terrible burning smell filling the room, and even his hair and flesh around the electrodes started catching on fire. The whole thing took about 8 minutes, and many spectators were so disturbed that some tried to leave early. His autopsy would later show that the electrode that was attached to his back had actually burned through to his spine. He was literally cooked alive. The press was brutal. The New York Times ran the headline, "Far worse than hanging," and even George Westinghouse, one of the electoral pioneers, later joked they might have been better off just using the axe on him. So while the electric chair was supposed to be a more humane alternative, William Kemler's execution showed it was still a horrific, barbaric experience, something that stuck in public memory, especially after scenes like the shocking one in the Green Mile movie. An image that stuck with people for over a century. But even though his death was extremely horrific, its rocky start didn't stop the method of executing inmates by the electric chair method from taking the country by storm, ultimately phasing out hangings and becoming the most widely accepted form of execution going forward. And then, over the years, the electric chair became this dark but unmistakable symbol of capital punishment here in the United States. And while the electric chair was invented and first used right here in the US, it wasn't just an American thing. It was also used in places like the Philippines. While the electric chair became a symbol nationwide, its story in Georgia has its own unique chapter. It all starts in Milledgeville, not only Georgia's old capital, but also home to the state's very first penitentiary. This is where the electric chair made its mark on Georgia's history, setting the stage for how executions would be carried out in the state for decades to come. Now, back in 1803, when Milledgeville replaced Louisville as Georgia's capital, the state set aside a 16-acre plot of land specifically for building a prison. Construction started in 1812, and by February 1817, the first inmates were locked behind its gates. This made Georgia one of the first southern states to move toward a centralized penitentiary system. Now, over time, the Milledgeville prison became more than just a place for confinement. It became the site of some of Georgia's darkest chapters, including the infamous lynching of Leo Frank in 1915. Frank, who was a Jewish factory superintendent, was convicted in a highly controversial case. He was kidnapped from the prison by vigilantes and lynched near Marietta. His case would spark national outrage and the founding of the Anti-Defamation League, but Milledgeville wasn't done making history. In 1924, Georgia outlawed hanging as its official method of execution. That same year, the state brought in a new tool for capital punishment, the electric chair, which was nicknamed Old Sparky. It was installed inside the Milledgeville prison. Painted white and wired up by state funds, a total cost nearing $5 grand, the chair became the centerpiece of Georgia's death chamber. It's a grim piece of history that Milledgeville wasn't just the site of Georgia's first execution by electric chair. It was also once the capital of the Southern Confederacy. On September 13, 1924, Howard Hinton, a 22-year-old black man convicted of raping, robbing, and assaulting a white woman in DeKalb County, became the first person executed by electrocution in Georgia. Now, that moment marked the start of a new era in the state's justice system and a long and troubling history with the electric chair. According to reports, Georgia's first execution by the electric chair went smoothly, which is a chilling way to describe something so brutal. Public reaction at the time was relatively muted. There wasn't widespread outrage or protest, but as we know over time, the chair became more controversial, especially as patterns of racial disparity in who was being executed became too impossible to ignore. Most of the men electrocuted in Georgia were black, and people began asking harder questions about fairness and justice. From 1924 to 1937, 162 people were executed in Milledgeville's death chamber, all under the watch of the prison's warden, who had become Georgia's official executioner. County sheriffs still delivered the condemned to the prison, but it was the warden who flipped the switch, sometimes assisted by doctors, guards, and even electricians. The condemned could also have their lawyers, relatives, friends, and religious representatives with them in the execution chamber when it was time for them to face their death. For 14 years, Old Sparky operated out of Milledgeville, offering what officials at the time might have called a short walk and a comfortable chair, a cold euphemism for state-sanctioned death. In 1924, Georgia officially adopted it as the method of execution, and lawmakers overwhelmingly supported the shift. But not everyone was initially on board. Some local leaders, including a representative from Baldwin County, weren't exactly thrilled that Milledgeville, the site of the first electric chair, would become known as the execution hub for the state. They didn't want their hometown associated with such death. But Georgia wasn't alone in using this method. During this time period, other states also had their own electric chairs, many of them also nicknamed Old Sparky. States like Arkansas, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Kentucky, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia all adopted electrocution and gave it a similarly eerie identity. By the mid-1930s, the prison in Milledgeville was overwhelmed. Too many inmates, too little space. So the state made a move. A new facility was built in Reedsville, and with it came the relocation of Old Sparky. On January 1st, 1938, the chair was transferred to the brand new Georgia State Prison. The old prison farm in Milledgeville was eventually demolished, but its legacy as Georgia's first execution site remained. Reedsville didn't ease up on executions. In fact, things actually ramped up. Just a few months after the move, on May 6, 1938, the chair claimed its first victim at the new site, Archie Goodwin, a 37-year-old black man convicted of murder in Worth County. And from that point forward, the electric chair at Reedsville became a grim fixture. Over the next 26 years, 256 people were executed there. The youngest was just 16 years old, and the oldest was 72. All but one were a man. The only woman ever executed in Georgia was Lena Baker. Her story stands out, and not just because of her gender. Lena was a black woman from Randolph County, convicted of killing a white man she had worked for, a man who had reportedly mentally, physically, and sexually abused, kidnapped, and even imprisoned her. She had been convicted by a jury of all white men, and after a day of just a one-day trial for killing her white employer and longtime sexual abuser in self-defense. You can hear her full tragic story right here on this channel. In 1945, she was sent to the chair. It's believed that it took several shocks to fatally kill Lena, and she died after 6 minutes in the electric chair. She would proclaim her innocence up until her death. Her final words, still recorded today, reflect the injustice she faced at the time for being a black woman, ultimately who killed a white man. But by the end, Lena found peace and had accepted her fate. Her last words were, "What I done, I did in self-defense, or I would have been killed myself. Where I was, I could not overcome it. God has forgiven me. I have nothing against anyone. I picked cotton for Mr. Pritchett, and he has been good to me. I am ready to go. I am one in the number. I am ready to meet my God. I have a very strong conscience." Decades later, her name would be cleared, and she was posthumously pardoned in 2005, a heartbreaking acknowledgement of how flawed the system had been. The last person executed at Reedsville was Bernard Dye, a 34-year-old white man convicted of murder in McDuffie County. He died in the chair on October 16, 1964. After that, the execution stopped for a while. It wouldn't be until 1983 that Georgia resumed the death penalty, this time at a different facility and with a brand new chair. In 1964, executions across the U.S. were put on hold by the Supreme Court. Then, in 1972, a major turning point came with the Furman versus Georgia decision, where the court struck down the existing death penalty laws, saying they were too arbitrary and unfair. The Furman versus Georgia case was a game changer. In 1972, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty, as it was being applied at the time, was unconstitutional, specifically because it was being imposed in an inconsistent, often discriminatory way. The court wasn't saying the death penalty itself was inherently wrong, but rather that the legal systems using it were too arbitrary and lacked proper guidelines, leading to unfair sentencing, especially along racial and socioeconomic lines. This decision effectively put a temporary halt to the death penalty nationwide, forcing states to revisit their laws and sentencing procedures. It marked a critical moment in the history of capital punishment, making clear that even the most severe form of justice must follow rules that are consistent, transparent, and free from bias. Georgia responded by rewriting its laws, and the new version went into effect on March 28, 1973. A few years later, in 1976, the Supreme Court looked at Georgia's updated law in the Gregg versus Georgia case, and this time, they upheld it. That decision basically reopened the door for the death penalty, not just in Georgia, but for across the country. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that part of Georgia's death penalty law, specifically the language that allowed for the death sentence in cases deemed outrageously or vauntally vile, horrible, or inhuman, was too vague to be constitutional. In that same year, Georgia's infamous electric chair was moved once again, now this time to the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson. A brand new chair was built for the facility, while the original, no longer in use, was retired and put on display at the old Georgia State Prison in Reedsville. The execution chamber at the Georgia State Prison has also been restored to its original condition and is open for the local community to visit. The GDCP became the new home for death row inmates in Georgia moving forward, where they remain until their sentence is overturned, commuted, carried out, or they die of natural causes. and this is still the home for death row inmates to this day. The first person to be executed at the new facility after the death penalty was reinstated was John Eden Smith, a white insurance salesman convicted of a double murder in Bibb County. His execution on December 15, 1983, marked Georgia's return to capital punishment after nearly 2 decades. He was facing the death penalty after being convicted of shooting his wife's former husband, Ronald Atkins, and Ronald's new wife, Winetta, in a plot to collect $20 grand in insurance money. The plot was said to have been concocted by John's wife and carried out by John and another man, another John Mary, both of whom are serving life sentences. According to court testimony, the jury believed that John wanted to impress the local mafia for being a hitman. He made no final statement of his own and refused to select any witnesses for his electrocution. Witnesses say that there were 3 unidentified executioners who pressed 3 small buttons, one of which sent 2,000 volts of electricity through John Smith's body for 2 minutes. This is supposedly prison tradition, and none of the executioners knew whether or not they were pressing the lethal button. John's body tensed as if he took his last breath and was quickly pronounced dead after 6 minutes.
Behind the chair, a screen, and in stark contrast to the white chair and white walls, there are electrical wires and gears and 3 black handles. 3 men stand there and simultaneously pull those handles down, never knowing which of them actually sent the charge to the man strapped in the chair.
I've received a lot of letters of people volunteering to fill that position from all over the country. I think if we use a staff member, it'll be an emotional situation for that person, but we've had staff to also volunteer for the job, so I think we will have adequate people to carry it out.
The execution chamber is a deceptive place. White walls, white ceiling, white chair, antiseptically pure. The condemned are strapped in so that their feet are touching a metal floor plate, and a metal pot with wires attached to it would be on their heads. Their body is the connector. After the execution, the body would be cooled on this marble table and placed in a storage vault until it could be removed from the prison.
Since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, Georgia executed 23 people by electrocution. But over time, the electric chair began to fall out of favor. Public opinion started to shift, especially after several botched executions raised serious questions about whether the method was even humane after all. Eventually, the state had to reckon with it.
After the execution, the names of the dead are put into the death book. All of the people in this book were electrocuted here. The last electrocution took place 10/16/64. Bernard Dye was killed for the crime of murder. He died at 11:16 a.m. And the first to be executed was Howard Hinson of DeKalb County. That was back in 1924.
So by 2000, Georgia lawmakers decided it was time for a change. The General Assembly passed legislation replacing electrocution with lethal injection as the state's new method of execution. Then in 2001, the Georgia Supreme Court made it official, ruling that the electric chair constituted cruel and unusual punishment. So, just like that, old Sparky was retired for good. The story of electrocution in Georgia starts in Milledgeville, the state's old capital, and home to its first state penitentiary, the very place where the electric chair was first used in our state. This prison wasn't just a site of punishment, it was a living piece of the state's history, bearing the marks of decades of executions, inmate life, and the complex realities of capital punishment. But in 2018, that history came under threat when the Georgia State Farm Prison was quietly demolished. Many locals, like Edwin Atkins, whose great-grandfather was the prison chaplain for 14 years, were devastated. Edwin had organized a Facebook group dedicated to saving the building, knowing that his prison held more than just bricks and mortar. It held stories of faith, suffering, and justice.
In order to not let history fade away, if you don't have anything to link it to, the physical being, it really doesn't mean much. That was their home. That was the economic engine for Milledgeville. That's where people made their money. Now their money's gone, their houses are torn down, and now the physical presence is going to be taken down. What a slap in the face.
To him and others, the prison wasn't just an old building. It was a landmark of Georgia's capital punishment history, a place where inmates once faced the electric chair and where inmate artwork and religious messages still remained on the walls. But despite this The demolition happened without public hearings or much warning, leaving many feeling that a vital piece of Georgia's past was lost without a chance to be remembered properly. Historians and community members argued that the prison could have been transformed into a museum, drawing attention to its role in stories like the infamous Frank case, which still resonates through popular culture today. Now sitting at the site is a historic marker, and local groups raise funds to commemorate the past. This demolition stands as a powerful reminder. Understanding our history, even the darkest parts, is crucial if we want to know where we as a society are headed. Over time, the electric chair became both a tool of justice and a symbol of controversy, often criticized for its gruesome nature and botched executions. As we reflect on this history, it's clear that these stories of innovation, suffering, and change are part of a larger conversation about justice, humanity, and how we remember our past. In the end, the electric chair had claimed the lives of 440 men and just one woman right here in the state of Georgia. Although once widely used, the electric chair has fallen out of favor with the rise of lethal injection, which is now considered a more humane method. But as we all know, there are just as many supporters for lethal injection as there are people who oppose it. While most states have since moved on to lethal injection, electrocution remains an option in several states, a stark reminder of the country's complex and evolving relationship with capital punishment. And even today, a handful of states still allow electrocution as a way to carry out the death penalty. Sometimes the inmate can choose it, other times it's decided for them. States like Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Tennessee all still have the electric chair as an option. But for most places, lethal injection is the main method used. And in Georgia, lethal injection is the only legal method of execution used today. Even though the chair is no longer in use, its history and what it represented still lingers in Georgia's collective memory. The electric chair was introduced as a symbol of progress, a clinical, scientific answer to the brutality of hanging. For many, it felt like a step forward, a sign that even in death, society could apply reason and restraint. But when the switch was thrown for the first time and William Kemler's body, the first man to ever be electrocuted in the US, burned and convulsed before a horrified crowd, that illusion began to crack almost immediately. What followed was more than a century of trial and error, innovation, and controversy. States cycled through execution methods, each one pitched as more humane than the last. But over time, the narrative around the electric chair shifted from marvel to relic, from advancement to an uncomfortable reminder of how far we'll go to preserve the illusion of justice. In Georgia, the electric chair didn't just leave physical scars. It left historical ones. Behind the cold walls of the state prison, lives were ended under the veil of legality, and for decades it stood as both a monument to punishment and a mirror to the values of the time. Its demolition sparked debate not just about historical preservation, but about how we confront uncomfortable truths. What do we choose to remember, and what do we choose or try to erase? And then there's the deeper question: was the electric chair ever truly humane, or just the best we could have come up with at the time? Even now, as lethal injection has become the norm, problems still persist. Botched executions, prolonged suffering, legal battles over drug protocols. We've swapped one method for another, but the heart of the issue still beats today. At its core, the death penalty forces us to wrestle with what justice really looks like. Is it accountability, revenge, closure? Are executions truly for the victims, or are they for the witnesses, for the families, for the state? We like to think we've come a long way since the days of public hangings and smoke-filled death chambers, but have we? Or have we just become better at hiding it? As the story of the electric chair fades into history, maybe it leaves us with one last jolt, not of voltage, but of reflection. Because when we talk about progress and how we kill, maybe the real question is, why are we still doing it at all? One thing is certain, history may have written the final chapter on the electric chair, but the people who died in its grasp, their names, their pain, their unanswered questions, still flicker in our collective conscience, long after the current has stopped. And their stories and legacies are far from over.